So, thank you very much for you all to come. As we are keeping this traditional, the first 5 minutes, we usually share all the good news, only the good news of the week, of the month, or any conference that you want to share. So that's the time. Who else have good news?
Tomorrow we have the defense of the master's thesis of Laila that are processed fecal samples here in the laboratory. Also, we had, in fact, we had 6 stipends on this scholarship program, and out of the 6, because of the fact that these accidents involving animals was closed up to yesterday afternoon, we have 3 stipends without candidates at the moment, and we need to find ways of catching that. They opened for us for 4, but then in a meeting became clear there was an illegal thing to do, and they reduced to 3, and then we have 3 scholarship field. I also have a really good news. Today I had meetings from early morning till now. Then we have a position open now. Initially is a 6 months. It could be 1-year position. It's going to be someone working towards the goal of building a repository of information on the skin trade of donkeys and other activities. They're also interested in mapping what's happening with donkeys, and the selection process could start as soon as next week. That's quite an exciting possibility. The other one, yesterday, I was in a meeting with the Secretary of Agriculture of the state of São Paulo in Bebedouros, and I saw an amazing display of precision technology applied to agriculture at the experimental station of the state with Copper Citrus, that is a partner. And we're in the race for this large proposal with the BNDES. And we may have a partner that has an apport of resources to match that. And that was a very, very positive meeting also had a meeting with the Donkey Sanctuary that is going to finalize the issue of the resources to complete the project. That these are all kind of taking place as we speak. Trace Bay is very interested, Thiago.
Yeah, I saw the email.
She wants to meet us, but I'm not going to meet her without us having a real clear plan. The Norwegians are excited with the brushing of the board. You better publish soon because
we should. We have to process the saliva samples. We were processing them this morning, but we also have to do some statistical analysis yet.
Brushing the board became a major hit.
Yeah.
And I think that I have other.
I was in Chile.
Yes.
Yes. In the course about ethics in animals in research was really interesting. I was part in the international group in South America. And I was also in CONSEA, which is the Brazilian Council for Using Animals. I think that just Brazil in South America, there is this kind of organization. It's really interesting. And I was there in the conference Monday and Tuesday. And I will share next month the information that I learned there. And also some, I think, 2 slides about this conference.
There are a lot of vegetable in the vegetable garden. If you want.
That's a really good news.
I think we need to create a better way of promoting what CECSBE is doing, and I of course
You
in the
should
back,
have a Twitter.
in the background, and you know that I'm still negotiating with the Botswana government. I'm negotiating. They only talk to me. Then I'm negotiating on behalf of the University of Sao Paulo, the Botswana government, on different issues. They have this deadline of having someone here at the University of Sao Paulo this semester still, but it seems to be a really ambitious type of
Yes.
goal.
Right. That is good. Good goal. So also, I have a good news that we start to training the young bars to jump in the mannequin. So we have a few success, but they are really a little bit young. But we have already to until today 4 success with 20 bars. So we have more 10 to training, maybe more 2 success. So that's also good news. Who else? Anybody else? Anybody else? No? So I want to thank you, Marisol, to speak with us. Marisol, she's a veterinarian. She did her undergrad in Universidade Nacional de Colômbia. And now she's a PhD student of Universidade de Estúdio de Milano, de Teramo. And she's doing her part of his PhD project here with us in our group. So thank you very much and have a good presentation.
Thank you, Thiago. Thank you for everyone to stay here with me and listen my presentation. I want to talk about practical approach to positive emotions. And in the introduction, I want to I just say something about other things that in another presentation doesn't talk about it, like the evolutionary aspect from about emotions. What is emotion? Emotion is an intense but short-lived affective response to an event which is associated with a specific body change. The emotions refer to processes which are likely to have involved from basic mechanisms that gave the animals the ability to avoid harm or avoid punishment, or to seek valuable resources or reward. We have some tools to approach the emotions, like understand the different types of emotions, pleasure, unpleasant, valence, or weak and strong incitation, uh, elucidating the mechanisms, neural circuit models, neural mechanisms about emotion, and the components of emotions, not just the brain or the neural components is important to understand that, but we have behavioral and autonomic and subjective component. The subjective component is just too human, is that we know. And in the last decades of the 20th century, there was a surge of interest in animals in science. Good welfare is not simply the absence of negative experience, it's primarily the presence of positive experiences such as pleasure or happiness or behavior like play. It's better to ensure joyful and content behavior, happiness behavior, rather than focusing on behaviors that represent needs that have to be fulfilled to avoid suffering. In an evolutionary perspective, the emotions are an adaptive program connected with the physiology to resolve problems. If we have positive or negative emotion before to do or take a decision, eh, that it's important to make the correct decision. And it's an adaptative in the adaptive program. And they are organized systems that allow the organisms to confront relevant situations. And how I talked before, it's in the humans, it's a subject. We have a subjective component about emotion. We can talk about our emotions and don't know that exist in the animals yet. But we have behavior in the animals. We have behavior, structure, and brain chemistry are similar in humans and in animals. And it's therefore likely that they feel as we do, because we have other things to assess the emotion. Yes.
What do you mean about subjective component? Why it's just in humans, not in animals?
Maybe in the animals, the subject component stay in there in these animals, but now we don't tools to assess that. We have two cognitive component of emotional processing. The cognition refer to the process, the neurological process involved in the acquisition, storage, and manipulation of an information. That mean the learning, how we learn something, how we create memory about something, or how we use the information to choose something or take a decision. The emotional state requires a primary appraisal of the emotional stimulus. Appraisal. When I talk about appraisal, I talk about the assess how the animal or the person assess some situation. Emotional state requires a primary appraisal of the emotional stimulus. That is the assessment that individual makes about the relevance of a stimulus, responsible for the action planning and execution. That assess or appraisal is influenced by innate automatic response that probably involve learning and memory and previous encounter with stimuli during the individual lifetime. The learning and memory, that it's two important concepts, because if we have the emotion linked with that concept, learning and memory, troubles, or for example better memory or better learning maybe will be linked with a better or bad emotion.
That's a really important thing. This issue of distinction between cognitive process and emotional process, the issue that involves this appraisal. And you know the photo. The photo is
The clever hands.
clever hands. Yeah, that's what I meant for this discussion. There's an innate. There's some studies in the past of innate response to snake. There's a beautiful experiment carried out with this, where they put a monkey holding a flower, and they remove the flower and put the snake, and there's an immediate response from the monkey. Meaning, at the presence of the snake is something that elicits this type of negative response.
The memory about snakes, for example, if we have some event with a negative event with a snake, it's different if we doesn't have any event involved with snakes. Or
This is the innate one.
yes,
Right. Yeah. Apparently, with the snake is something that you don't even need to see the snake. It seems to be a really, yeah. What is that? That's the one.
the professor talked about the photo. He's clever hands. It's a horse in the 1900, early 1900. Some people did an experiment to teach to the horse to resolve mathematical problems. And after some years, the scientists um, understand that hands don't resolve the problems. He just understand the hands, the person to ask to the horse 1+1 or something like that, he have some move when in his hands when the answer is correct, and the horse that is interesting because the horse learn to understand the hands, the move in the hands, and that is a cognitive used to cognitive process. For instance, the emotional state can lead to change in cognitive functioning, such as increased tendency to attend to threatening stimuli during fear, or an enhanced memory for an unhappy event during sadness. An emotion may directly alter the judgment or risk assessment process. I talked about that before. We have players, structures, substance importance to assess or understand the positive emotional states. Basically, the main players for positive emotional states are the amygdala complex and, most important, the nucleus accumbens septi. In that table, we have, for example, substance like dopamine, and the origin is in the ventral tegmental area. And the effect is when the animal or the person is in expect of reward or the act of reward. We have oxytocin, the pituitary, other structures and substance. In some art papers, I read the structure of amygdala. They have activation of some areas during anticipation of rewards in monkeys, for example, not just in the case of fear. Or in humans, when humans, while listening pleasant music, they have to activation of some areas during some areas of amygdala. Okay, now the point, assessment of positive emotional states. In some papers, the mostly research about that was doing in is doing in humans, and but in humans too are more information about negative emotional states to in animals. And for example, in a study where the one baby and her mom play peekaboo, is that game, and when that game was doing with other person and a strange person, they have a correlation in variation of her rate, uh, or less. The hair rate was less when the play was with the mom, and was different with another person. Higher heart rate variation in human adults after self-induced positive emotional states, that's found. And another interesting tools to assess emotional states, for example, the immune system. A recent study found that pleasure stimuli in human, they doing a humoristic storytelling to someone, induce an increase in secretory immunoglobulin A. We can do that on animals too. High cortisol levels are associated with a higher probability of engaging in passive coping. Passive coping is with the animal don't, or the individual don't do don't respond to challenge, or yes, when he don't respond to the challenge, and that it's related with high cortisol levels. High catecholamine levels are associated with a higher probability of engaging in active coping when the individual can respond to the challenge, and when he have a successful in that response, that response of challenge. They have a high catecholamine. The catecholamine measure is difficult because they have a short life, life. Saliva protein composition could be used as monitoring tool for the assessment of some emotional mood states. I read about that the protein like alpha amylase was higher in individuals with better emotional states, or other proteins have than 20 or 200 kilodaltons different proteins in situation with positive or negative emotional states.
Just to, because also testosterone can be an indicator of good mood in saliva,
Thank you.
especially for humans.
So, may deliver suitable approach to assess positive emotion in animals when combined with behavioral records. We can combine that substance, measure substance, with behavioral records. About behavior assess, I think that experiment is interesting. Positive and negative contrast. In that experiment, the piglet was training to perform a task by giving it a reinforcer of a certain size. In that case, little size, if we compare it to that size. He is training to that reward, a little reward, and after that, the animal is then given a larger reinforcer than they had been given before, like a big apple. The behavior of that animal was different because they have some behavior like play or jump or move the head in different ways. But when we do that experiment in the opposite way, he is training with the big apple, and after that we just give a little apple. That is a negative contrast because the animal maybe, or in that study, the animal have frustration, for example, behavior of frustration, or or any behavioral change. The size of the reward, just the size.
Because maybe they can also like the difference of just the size and be a negative or
Yes,
can be like same.
yes.
They are receiving
That is other experiment like judgment bias. I want to, yes.
aspect. They're shaking.
Yes, yes, a negative. Okay, that. Positive contrasts correspond to the emotional elation in humans. Elation is like happiness, while negative contrasts may to be related to frustration or disappointment. There is research about anticipatory behavior in piglets when the announcing the arrival of enrichments like use of hay, for example. They have play behavior and reduce waning stress. But we have to take caution about the anticipatory behavior, because when we have absence of a reaction to a reward, that may indicate that the animal is in a state either of full satisfaction or of anhedonia, the incapacity to experiment pleasure. That it's an short line to wait. Okay, another the anticipatory behavior. We know some behaviors, good behaviors, like play, like jumps, like social behavior, not in agonistic way. In pigs, for example, extra space, food, or straw increase that behavior. And I think with Catalina, in her house, for example, when they are training, when you go to clean the the place, they know that after that you put a straw for her, and they have an attention on Leandro when he's put the straw on the, I don't know, the kind of, yes, in a net, a lot of attention. It's anticipatory behavior, something interesting to assess.
That's how they show the
Anticipation, and yes, of a reward in that case. Another example of a positive in contrast in an original study, CRESPE report that rats for which the quantity of reward has just been increased run faster towards the food reward than the rats having always received a large quantity of reward. The rat run faster when the rat know that the reward will be larger in that case. Due to the relatively small number of studies, further research is needed to confirm the value of a positive construct model in the study of potential positive emotion and their behavioral expressions. Another tool to assess or make a better welfare to the animal, it's coping and controllability that we give for the animal the controllability. For example, the environment, the possibility of controlling the environment and coping successfully. Coping successfully means when I have a challenge and I have success in that challenge, is coping successfully. The possibility of controlling the environment and coping successfully with challenge may be another source of positive emotions. Do the animal master of the environment, and successful coping stops the initial stress reactions. It's important to give an opportunity to learn how to cope, because failure will eventually lead to chronic stress. If you don't give the time or the tools to learn how he can be successful in the challenge, the animal maybe will have a chronic stress.
What do you mean coping? That mean a situation is challenging?
Yes.
And you know how to resolve it.
Yes.
It's a really nice experiment by one called Hagen. She worked with Broom. Was I think that she published in the year 2000. Actually, you see this
I'm going
reference?
to talk about some experiments.
Okay. Yeah. Is the eureka effect in cows. You look at the eureka effect when the cow solved the
I'm
problem.
going to search.
Yeah, eureka effect. Hagen, she's a Norwegian woman. Please, Hagen.
Thank you. In that experiment, each animal out of a group of pigs had to learn an individual acoustic signal, just an signal sound for individual pig, as a call to work for food by pressing a button. The animal have three demands in that experiment. He have to be with attention for the individual acoustic sound. He have to localize its source and then respond to a button with their nose disc in order to be rewarded with a small portion of food. Using this approach, it will be possible to analyze the physiological and behavioral effects of a complex but predictable environment presenting positive challenge with which animals are able to cope. Yes, that is a challenge with higher probability to success for the animal. And let's see, the behavior and physiological expression can be assessed. We have another approach, the qualitative behavior assessment. The Professor Adraudo know about it. He worked with the researchers in Italy, no, in Milano University. The qualitative behavior assessment is a relatively new scientific method to evaluate the expressive quality of animal behavior and emotions. That behavior assessment need training assessors, trained persons, and that assess can be combined with another welfare indicators like behavior. That is an example used in a group of donkeys, aggressive behavior, agitated, anxious, or happy, playful, pushy, relaxed, responsive. It's a table of qualitative behavior assessment. In that work, they link the good health indicators such as no lesion, good hooves condition, and no joint swelling appear associated with curious and playful behavior. We can link the good health with good welfare, for example, in that case. Many studies show that when correctly applied, QBA shows good correlation to behavioral, physical, and physiological measures, thus confirming the validity of the observed assessments. That is an important. The welfare being a complex multidimensional concept, no single indicator can be considered as an exhaustive system to evaluate the welfare of animals, and it is always preferable to integrate and cross-validate QBA with other measure of welfare. We have another example about how we can assess the emotional state in animals, the judgment, how we take a decision. We have judgment to take a decision, and depend of our emotionality in different cases. We take good or bad decisions. For example, I want to do in my research and in the research of Leandro too. We want to do that judgment test. How is what is that? We have piglets. We will train the piglets to understand that in an open field place, to understand that in the, for example, the left part of the place have a feeder with apples, for example, and that involve laterality of the animal. To understand that in the left place have a positive or reward, a positive thing or a reward, and after that he have to learn that in the right side he have a negative um, stimulus. We can close the feeder, for example, and the animal doesn't um, pick or should not eat the apple, or put air in her face, for example. When we know that the animals understand that laterality about negative or positive um, mm, mm, positive or negative situation, we give to the animal an ambiguous situation. We put the feeder in the middle, and if the animal it's more faster or less faster to approximate to the feeder, we can suppose that the animal is with a judge optimist or pessimist judge about the ambiguous situation. It's clear. Okay. We have another tools, indirect behavioral tests, for example, open field and novel object tests. There are to assess fear, but an animal with less fear maybe have better emotional state. For example, memory tests I talk about in the start of the presentation, learning tests, attention tests. That is all. Thank you.
Good. I have some good news too. I exchanged emails with Mike Mendel, and he said he cannot. He's just come back from holiday and he's not able to give a talk on the 30th, but he offered to be in a question and answers about measuring positive emotion with us on the 30th.
Perfect.
At the finish of our, then
That's
we can
important.
prepare. If you have a specific question, we can prepare. Then we can
Mhm.
go through about that.
To prepare the
30th, yeah. Then you have specific protocols for research. We
wonderful.
can even prime him and then get the discussion. That's going to be a question and answers about positive emotion on the 30th to finish our month of positive emotions.
Thank you. That is wonderful.
You didn't put anything on facial expressions.
Facial expression,
Yeah.
vocalization.
Vocalization,
I
and,
forget that vocalization.
Yeah.
And
Eye
move of
temperature,
tail.
tail movement. Because the issue is that I talk about that a lot, but in fact, I mean, I haven't done really any work on that. I feel that it's a long time since I saw some of your reference. The references are from the late 90s, early 2000. Then people have been thinking about that for a long time. Even Chris Hagen's work is from year 2000, 18 years ago. These Ulrich effects.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm not sure that they are able to see the difference. Maybe it's everything reward for them, like a big piece or a small piece. It's reward. And
It's confused.
I think the real danger is us not measuring positive emotions, but we measure the absence of negative emotions.
yes,
Because and I think that's what would be very critical. What kind of test that was about real positive emotions, and what kind of test that was about the absence of negative emotions. And this is the real tricky part.
yes. But for me, the main challenge on this is regarding to your presentation, Professor, that you show the definition of happiness that can be three ways, like joy, I forgot, like excitement and serenity. And for me, we pass most of the part with serenity that can be confounded by anhedonia, that we show the same behavior, the same motor pattern of behavior, that we don't express anything.
Yes.
So can be anhedonia or serenity that are completely the opposite
Yes.
meanings for us in our emotional
One
life.
is good and the other is bad. for
Yes,
example.
but for me, the most happy people, talking about humans, are these ones that are in serenity most of the time. So how we measure this? And in
How we
animals, it's
know?
more,
Like serenity or anhedonia.
yes, it's much more difficult because we don't, it's not like common that we pass a lot of time in a joy or excited emotions, feeling this. It's not common. The most common is serenity. But how to measure this?
And we're in a world that is totally biased with Facebook and pictures. No one put, or just a few people put some negative things there.
Yes.
The majority of people are just in constant state of elation. I mean, it must have a negative impact on all of us.
Believe.
Yeah.
And another thing that's really interesting is about innate behavior that some years ago in evolutionary field of research, they were thinking that was by chance, this kind of mechanisms. Like you have the genes and you survive more, reproduce more because you avoid snakes. But we have the genes. But nowadays, the epigenetic are showing that it can change by males in mice. There is a paper in one generation. So the paper was older of I don't remember which predator, but was a predator. I don't remember. Then the males passed the genes demethylated for the offspring. So the next generation was able to understand that that odor was negative one. So imagine this, because was few years ago was genetic drift that was completely by chance. So they will survive if they have the genes by mutations. That was we were thinking that was completely random. The mutations. The next generation. So
That one.
and what the gene was demethylated because the gene was disorder, it's nothing. So I will not care for disorder. So in that males, the gene was in the sperm was demethylated. So the offspring start to have fear of disorder that before was neutral.
Just one generation.
One generation. And this changed completely how we see evolution. Evolution. Because the mutations was by chance. But nowadays they know that CPG methylated it's more 12 times more propensity to have a mutation, to mutate. So the environment is quickly changing our genome, and these innate behaviors are like this. This is really surreal.
Yeah, but I think, in my opinion, that the mono-encoding RNAs is much more likable to transmit any information about the environment than like the methylation, demethylation, because sperm, I don't know in mice, but in pigs, for example, they have to stay at least 42 days. And at the moment that the males are exposed to this kind of challenge, let's say, until you see any difference in the sperm. But small RNAs and mono-encoded, just the epigenes transmitted that in pigs is 10 days. So I don't know, but I don't know if they.
But what I mean is, original much faster than we were thinking some years ago.
What has to do with positive emotion? We are talking about negative emotion. There's some twin studies showing that happiness, I mean, the ability of feeling happy, seems to have we say a genetic, but could be an epigenetic kind of background. In a sense, that people do have a template of experience this type of emotional, more positive way.
I think that we can focus in the behaviors that we know. For example, play. Play is a positive behavior.
You didn't say much about play in your talk.
I just talked a little, some
Yeah,
slides.
that's correct. I think, and I interrupt you just for a second. But there's nothing in the applied ethology literature more associated with a positive emotion than play.
Play. We can do that with offspring, for example. They have a lot of play behavior.
But I think that we have to advance because play is not common to see, and it's for us. Like I don't remember the last time that I was playing, but I'm considered that I'm happy. So I think that to assess happiness, we have to advance on this. Like
Yes, I
to
talk.
think in a different way.
I talk that play behavior is we are sure about that is a positive
Yes.
emotion, and the others emotions than we have emotion, positive emotion like humans, is different to assess in animals, and we can assess the behaviors then we sure about that is a positive emotion, an expression of a positive emotion, and it's correct. We need to assess the other emotion, positive emotion,
Yes.
in the other ways and develop some tests to assess that.
Yes, because at least the behavioral motor pattern of play in animals, I don't see in adults. It's much more
Yes.
difficult to see. So I
More
think that
difficult
for
to see.
assessing positive emotions, we have to think in other things, other mechanisms, maybe not just behavior. Maybe in the
Because the
genes,
needs are different in the adult animals.
gene expression, I think maybe
Mhm.
like serenity, we cannot measure so
No.
far.
It's a measure their happiness grooming activity in the adults. So they don't play, they groom. So
Yes, but maybe the subbeast that is performing, it's not happy. Like some groups that there is a complex hierarchy that the subbeasts have to do the dominance.
It's a bit more than that. The grooming part, there's a nice work by Galindo that showed that lame cows receive more grooming than non-lame cows.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's a kind of an empathy or pain relieving. But the truth is, I think everybody is worried because our toolbox to assess positive emotion is very poor,
Yes,
really poor.
really poor. And we come back to the negative ones.
Yeah,
With
the
my
absence of-
example.
exactly.
With my example, I was talking about other and I was talking about negative ones.
Yeah, absence. Yeah, but I think we need to create. I think what we need to do in our group is having somewhere to write down the different create a repository. Because I've asked Laura Catalina to help us to start kind of building this repository, and even Ingiliz's talk was quite general. We all come up with general, and I think the first one that really thought about that was the men with the cognitive bias. But again, it's still relatively incomplete, and because that's you infer something about the state, but you don't actually measure the.
Yes.
It's an indirect
Yeah.
measure.
Yes.
You need to be able to ask the animal. How do you
Yes.
feel?
How-
Maybe we should try something with ourselves. Maybe we should try ourselves, kind of come up with a daily kind of questionnaire where we create an anonymous, whatever, get a number, and then each one of us would kind of tell how they feel each day, or kind of
Yes, but
relate.
this is the reason that I insist that we have to have here a psychologist because they can measure emotions not just by what we say because we are biased. Like if you
But
go
it's
in the
just,
therapy, you say the things completely biased for your point of view, of course. But psychologists, I think that they are much more trained to exclude your opinion when you are talking and use other tools. So where we are more advanced on this, on positive emotions in humans, and who is doing this? Psychologists. So we should try to understand how they measuring, how they are understanding what is positive emotions, and then try to apply in animals.
I hate to disappoint you, but there's not much development there too. They're probably a bit better. I have some news. I spoke with Emma Otta. They have this massive grant together with Natura to study human welfare, kind of happiness, and I'm sitting tomorrow in this defense with one person in her group, and our goal is to see if we can organize a joint meeting to talk about positive affective states, right? But I honestly tell you, don't have high expectations in relation to their toolbox.
Individual.
Yeah.
But if we find something, because it's always related with neurotransmitters or not, neurochemistry. Like we are always doing something that we release.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find something like more material.
Yeah, but there's nothing more complete than a person's honest and genuine self-assessment. If I'm here telling, look, I mean, I'm partially happy. Or I'm waiting that grant for the past 9 months, and you say, look, yeah. And then,
I'm waiting my data about epigenetics.
And then Thiago trained the 20 and only had only not. That's the glass is half full, I guess. I have 4, but it is a real conversation. And there's been I think there's been several universities now offering type of courses on happiness. I saw that the University in Brasilia offered a course in the United States. There's several universities offering this kind of course on happiness. And I think it would be useful to bring happiness into the mainstream of the discussion. Maybe creating a kind of a optative discipline here. I wrote two grants asking money to study happiness in humans. Then they bluntly ignored that. I mean, I wrote it simply.
But there are a lot of studies on humans.
Huge.
But I think in one thing now. We can train the animals to receive, for example, affective or to receive help with something. We can train it to choose when he won't received, for example, affective from human, for example, that it's a positive emotion in the animal. When he have the
Motivation.
no, the oportunidade de decidir, the opportunity to choose between nor negative behavior. I don't want to talk about negative, but for example, quando eu passo a mão num cachorro, por exemplo, que ele possa decidir quando quer que.
Mas isso não é medir emoções. It's like just
Não,
deciding.
porque você quando when Caramba, vou falar em português agora. Quando vou para o café.
Yeah, that becomes a pure English seminar. Don't get a hybrid English seminar. Maybe
No, but that is not a sense of positive emotion. That event, but you can assess the hair rate, for example, the component of the saliva, in that moment when the animal experience that.
That can only be done in the brain. I mean, I think brain imaging has some because the period of this
or activation or some
there's some
areas.
There's some crazy experiments with humans and with sexual stimulation, measuring real time activation on brain areas. But the events are really quick and they disappear. I tell you what my and Thiago's in the right. I think we should really study Thiago's board before and after this kind of semen collection and facial expression.
Moving the tail.
Yeah.
No, but
But I
in
tell you-
collection.
But I just want to finish. For animal, as an indicator of poor welfare for me, is when an individual is unable to have positive emotion. And that's really one of the key diagnoses for depression in humans, when you're unable to process an event to be pleasurable. And that's why in terms of the toolbox, it's really important, because if an animal gets to environment that in theory should be pleasant, but is unable to feel that kind of pleasure, that's, in my opinion, is where you have a level of suffering that is enormous. Then in our case, that we work on this type of prenatal programming, is that, let's say, in your case, if you get the system so damaged that it doesn't matter how positive things are, you always kind of interpreting the negative side. That's why it becomes, of course, I'm looking from my perspective, but it becomes a really important.
Dysfunctional.
Yeah.
But it's anhedonia.
Yeah.
It's really extreme. But yes.
Coffee.
Okay, thank you so much.